The following program does not offer personal medical advice. Please consult your doctor before using any treatment or product we cover. Welcome to Go to Health Media with your host, Jonathan Marks. We provide a welcoming environment where experts educate you on important health topics, answer your questions, and provide information from which you can benefit in consultation with your doctor. You can visit and subscribe to the show at gotohealthmedia.com. And now, here is Jonathan Marks.
Hey everyone, this is Jonathan Marks. Welcome back to another great episode of Go to Health. Here's some disturbing news. There's a growing crisis in cancer care. Drug shortages are at an all-time high, impacting the availability of life-saving medications, especially for childhood and young adult cancers like leukemia and lymphoma. These shortages are disproportionately affecting patients in rural and underserved communities and even disrupting clinical trials. The situation is so bad that the FDA reports that the current cancer drug shortage is the worst in 3 decades. The shortages have forced clinicians to modify or withhold cancer treatment, which can impact patient outcomes and quality of life. With us to discuss this situation is Dr. Carolyn Hendricks, a practicing medical oncologist specializing in breast cancer genetics, screening, and treatment at Maryland Oncology Hematology. She's a member of the American Society of Clinical Oncology Board of Directors, that's ASCO, and Dr. Hendricks was honored as the Advocate of the Year by the Association for Clinical Oncology in 2019. Welcome to the show, Dr. Hendricks. How are you today?
Very well. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. Why are cancer drugs happening and why have they reached such a critical stage?
Well, in a nutshell, the reason is because cancer care has become so complex. Over the past couple of decades, the chemotherapy regimens that oncologists like me offer our patients contain multiple medications, typically several blockbuster chemotherapy drugs that are on patent, and then typically some generic chemotherapeutic drugs. And it's the generic drugs that are really in crisis. Over half of the shortages relate to generic medications for cancer care.
So generic drugs are usually sold at lower prices, and I'm going to guess that that's less of an incentive for pharmaceutical companies to produce them. Is that true?
You absolutely have nailed it. Once drugs are off patent, they go into the generic market. The U.S. manufacturers essentially leave the market, and the vast majority of generic medications are currently manufactured overseas.
Wow. Is there a shortage of drug manufacturers for these drugs?
Well, generic manufacturers, yes, and there have been some key closures, unfortunately, because of safety issues. For several overseas manufacturing sites have either been shut down because they failed inspections, or they've been unable to maintain a stable supply of medications to meet the needs of the U.S. cancer care population.
In the introduction, we noted that this is affecting a lot of medications for young people. What's the cause for the age focus there?
Well, in pediatric patients, the regimens are extremely complex, but also associated with the highest chances of cure for our youngest patients. So making a modification in pediatric patients, the regimen can have very significant negative impacts on their chance of cure.
So with this shortage, how are patients and doctors managing without these essential drugs? How do you do this?
Well, what's happening is a lot of difficult discussions, what ASCO is referring to as impossible choices. I've had conversations with my patients and their families when their regimen needs to be adjusted, substitutions need to be made when feasible, doses may need to be reduced, and the schedule may need to be altered to permit access to the regimen for the patients in my practice, still occurring in 2024.
What steps can Congress and drug manufacturers take to solve this issue?
Well, ASCO's approach, and I'm on board, is a three-pronged approach. The first one is to make this a national issue so that oncologists in rural areas, oncologists who take care of pediatric patients, oncologists in community practices like me, and oncologists in academic centers all can be confronted and deal with shortages universally. If we heads up of an impending shortage, we can adjust and modify our supply and make put other mitigation plans in place. But Congress really needs to address the generic market, as you indicated. We need some innovative reimbursement strategies and incentives to bring U.S. manufacturing of generic chemotherapy drugs back to the United States. And clearly that's going to require some legislation and some regulation.
Got it. And why or how does this affect rural or underserved populations more than populations in major cities? What is it about rural healthcare that's being hit so hard?
Well, the issue in rural practice is that when you have to scramble to ensure the supply of a chemotherapy drug for your patients, the distances can be quite daunting. If you're in an urban cancer center, you might contact the urban cancer center down the street or in a suburban practice. But in rural areas, the distances really matter when oncologists try to scramble and their pharmacies try to acquire these drugs for the patients that they treat in rural areas.
And in rural areas, because I don't know how doctors acquire these drugs that they need, do they go through pharmacies? Do they go directly to the manufacturer? How does that work?
Well, they deal with specialty pharmacies. There's only a handful of specialty pharmacy companies that can manage these vast and very expensive inventories. So basically there's a negotiation process to ensure the supply of chemotherapy drugs for any healthcare institution, be it a solo practice or an academic institution. We all have to scramble for the medication.
So during the pandemic, there were a lot of shortages of lots of things and, supply chain issues. Is this a supply chain issue that has resulted from COVID-19, or is it something totally separate?
Well, it was heightened during the COVID pandemic, but the supply chain issue regarding the outsourcing of generics predates the COVID pandemic. It was just really exacerbated by it. It was made worse because physicians had some decrease in access to their physicians and their cancer chemotherapy drugs.
Right. So where can people go to learn more? I have a website that I just want to make sure I have the right one here, and you just confirm for me. I mentioned before the American Society of Clinical Oncology. It's ASCO. So where people can go is asco.org/impossible choices. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That's our social media video campaign. And patients can also fax, email, mail, or call their congressman and say, listen, I'm a cancer patient. A family member has cancer. My best friend has cancer. Help me to get to a solution.
Good. I was just going to ask what people can do. So they really can read this webpage and learn more and then connect with their congressman or senator.
I encourage it.
Good. That's wonderful. We've been talking with Dr. Carolyn Hendricks. She's a practicing medical oncologist specializing in breast cancer genetics, screening, and treatment at the Maryland Oncology Hematology Group. And she is also a member of the board of ASCO, which is the American Society of Clinical Oncology. Thanks so much for being with us today and alerting us to this problem. I had no idea, and I'm sure most of us didn't.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Take care, everybody. And as we say at the end of every show, go to health. Take care. See you again.
Thank you for tuning in this week to Go to Health Media. Be sure to join Jonathan Marks and another health expert next time. You can also catch the program on your favorite podcast platform. Until our next show, be sure to visit us on the web at gotohealthmedia.com and elevate your life.